I'm Mark Golub, and in the news continues to be the resumption of the peace process as the United States brokers negotiations between the State of Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And here on Shalom TV, we're asking some of the leading Middle East experts for their analysis of the issues relating to the negotiations and their sense of whether the current peace talks have any chance of producing positive results. And so I'm extremely pleased to have on our phones from Washington right now a man who I always enjoy hearing and learning from, Dr. Aaron David Miller, who's not only had a long and distinguished career as an advisor in the U.S. State Department, but Aaron Miller is currently a member of the U.S. Advisory Council's Israel Policy Forum, and he's with the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, where he's a leading voice in their Middle East program. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, man.
Aaron, I want to ask you for your take on some of the questions which put the current peace process into perspective, beginning with the most basic question. Aaron, why now? After so many years with no peace negotiations going on, what has changed on the ground, either within the Israeli position or the Palestinian Authority's position, that would lead one to think that this is the time a peace agreement can be attained?
I'm not sure a peace agreement can be achieved, but what's new is that it's clear that John Kerry has heard things from Benjamin Netanyahu and from Mahmoud Abbas that they cannot say to one another, and they're not prepared to say publicly. And it's on the basis of that Kerry has made a judgment that launching this negotiation on border security, refugees, Jerusalem, recognition of Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, the 5 core issues that drive the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that there may be merit in doing so. So nothing that the public, you and I, know empirically would lead one to the conclusion that now is the right time.
Interesting.
What appears to be new, and this is a judgment Kerry has made, is that he's heard things, probably from Netanyahu on June 67 borders and from Abbas on the Jewish state issue, which leads him to believe that there might be additional flexibility. And so, as a consequence, he's managed 6 trips in 4 months to create what is now a semi-empowered negotiation, the first in 5 years, between formal representatives of Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel. So this is not no one ever lost money betting on Arab-Israeli peace. The issues here are very tough. The chances of a conflict-ending agreement are very small. But that said, there may well be some common ground that's worth pursuing, and that, in essence, is what Kerry is banking on.
You know, I've heard you speak many times, Aaron. For you, that was a very positive assessment of even there being a small chance of this working out. Am I correct?
Well, what's new in this process is the degree of radio silence that surrounds it. Never in the history of the Arab-Israeli negotiations has there been such a situation in which Israelis, Palestinians, Americans are not talking. That leads one logically to one of 2 possibilities. First, there's something to protect, or alternatively, there's nothing to protect. Now, my assessment is not positive. My assessment is based on a conjecture, on an assumption. If the assumption is wrong, and that these 2 have not confided anything new, substantially new on the substance, then this will be a key to an empty room. But I'm not prepared. I have no stake in prejudging the issue. It does not contradict one iota, my analysis, which has been consistent ever since the collapse of the second Camp David summit, which I participated in July 2000, that there is a conflict-ending agreement available. Now, when I say conflict-ending, I mean, words are very important to me. Precision is extremely important. Conflict-ending agreement, not peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I mean, the Egyptians and the Israelis don't have peace. They've had a formal agreement since 1979, and it's the same with the Israelis and the Jordanians. But a conflict-ending agreement which would allow an Israeli prime minister and a Palestinian president to stand before their respective publics and say something like this, that we do not have peace and reconciliation. It may take a generation or more. But on all of the core issues, borders, security, refugees, Jerusalem, and the recognition of Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, our conflict is over. No more claims to be adjudicated, no more irredenta to be pursued. We're done. Now, I still believe that outcome is highly unlikely. But I'm not prepared to discount the possibility that something short of that is possible.
Let me digress for one moment. You were at Camp David in 2000?
I was.
You know, we've heard many people try to explain why those talks failed. And very often within the Jewish community, it was all because Arafat was given an opportunity, and at the last moment he refused to take it, and according to Elliot Abrams, infuriating President Clinton. Is that what you remember?
Oh, it wasn't there, first of all. And I respect Elliot's judgment. He's extremely smart. And when it comes to analyzing the Bush administration's policies, I think he has a great deal to say. But let's be clear about what happened and what didn't happen. Arafat's transgression at Camp David was not that he didn't sign an agreement. There was no agreement to sign, first of all. His transgression was that he refused to negotiate in any meaningful sense of the word, that you and I would understand the word negotiation. Barak went further with bolder proposals than any Israeli prime minister had ever gone. But were they far enough to reach a conflict-ending agreement? No. Barak, 3 months earlier, had offered Hafiz Assad, a man who wouldn't even allow his foreign minister to shake Barak's hand, whose view of peace was, something between the North and the South Pole in terms of degree of temperature, who supported Hezbollah running actions and Hamas against Israeli civilians. He offered Assad 99.9% of the Golan Heights. To Arafat at Camp David, he offered 90 to 92% of the West Bank. And let's be clear about something, so there's no illusion among the Jewish community or any other community. There's only one precedent for a final status agreement, and that's between Egypt and Israel. And Sadat demanded from Begin and got 100% of Sinai, plus the dismantling of all Jewish settlements at Yamit. So the reality is Assad demanded more than 100%. He demanded 110%. So the notion that Arafat was going to sign an agreement that offered him 92% of the West Bank with the Israelis retaining 8 to 10% was just a non-starter. So the fact is we were not close to an agreement at Camp David. And this is an illusion that people want to maintain. There was an opportunity, I think, to have a serious negotiation, but Arafat wasn't interested in that.
Okay, that is a fascinating analysis. Now, related to what's happening today, at the moment, Netanyahu is not offering Abbas 100% of the West Bank. Can Abbas accept today less than Arafat rejected in 2000?
No, what Abbas might be able to accept is 100% minus X. The X is the X% of the West Bank that the Israelis need to accommodate their security and demographic and settlement blocks. But in return for the X, let's be clear, the Israelis need 4% of the West Bank, or 5%, or 6%. They're going to have to compensate the Palestinians with an equivalent amount of territory from Israel proper. I mean, this is the notion of territorial land swaps of equal size and value on a one-to-one basis. I don't know whether the Prime Minister of Israel has accepted that formulation or not, but that is the formulation. So the creative accounting, through creative accounting, you end up with 100%. At the end of the day, let's be clear again, and I'm only reporting here. I'm not suggesting the Israelis accept any of this. If the Israelis want to deal with the Palestinians, it will cost them 100%. Now, that's X% from Israel proper plus the return of, I would argue, most of the West Bank. And that, by the way, territory is one of the issues that is the least complicated. When you get to refugees in Jerusalem, the so-called identity issues, you run into even gaps that are more profound.
Yes. By the way, are you saying that Barack was not willing to give the extra 8% out of some kind of, land on the Israeli side of the Green Line?
Right.
I see. So that's a difference between 2000 and 2013.
That's one difference. The other difference, I think, is that, I don't know if this is a difference, but what did not exist in 2000 was a degree of understanding on the part of the Americans and the Israelis what was required to reach an agreement. I remember Barack's initial offer when we heard it, which was 80%. I thought that was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
That an Israeli prime minister was prepared to offer that much. But we were not living on planet Earth. No Arab leader is going to sign an agreement like that, particularly if what the Israelis ask in return is to end the conflict. And that, of course, is another huge challenge here. You want a conflict-ending agreement, you settle all claims, you abandon all irredenta, and you deal with all of the issues, which is why I'm wary of the prospects.
Yes, I appreciate your perspective enormously, and I hope you understand. I know there are many, many people watching Shalom TV for whom you have clarified what happened in 2000 in a very, very powerful way. I want to take another sort of digression within the whole issue, because I have very much wanted to hear what you personally have to say on the issue of prisoner release. And Aaron, I was personally very disturbed that as a price for the start of peace negotiations, Israel was required to release some 100 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom are guilty of the most brutal, wanton murders of Israeli civilians. So first, Aaron, from your understanding, what did the Palestinians have to give up to Israel for the peace process to begin? What was the quid pro quo?
First of all, I think the frame of reference here is not correct. Benjamin Netanyahu did not agree to a four phases release of prisoners just to start negotiations. Why would any Israeli prime minister agree to that?
Yeah, why?
The Israelis have engaged in asymmetrical prisoner releases. Gilad Shalit, for example, or there have been several others. Rabin in '85, I think, was willing to return 1,100 Palestinians, in part to be able to identify and verify the fact that a handful of Israeli soldiers had been killed. I think that the deal here, if it was a deal, is far broader than that. I think Benjamin Netanyahu is in this for reasons that go well beyond that and relate to Iran and a conviction and a set of understandings with an American president that, in effect, the Iranian issue, if there can be no negotiated solution, the Iranian issue will be dealt with. And I think that that is the broader strategic filter within which this peace process is being played out. Mm-hmm. Because Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't make deals like this. He is a hawk like Begin, like Rabin, like Sharon, and the history of peacemaking in Israel is a history not of the left or even the center left. It's a history of transformed hawks who change for any number of reasons, driven by a variety of concerns and needs and requirements, which they judge to be important. I can't prove any of this. Mm-hmm. I don't. No one can. But this notion of restarting talks with the Palestinians goes well beyond a simple trade to get negotiations going. There's more here.
Yeah, I almost understand what you're saying. I understand how important it is for a variety of reasons, going beyond even the Israeli-Palestinian relationship, for peace negotiations to occur and to make third parties more comfortable with Israel and their attitude towards peace. I don't yet understand from you why a prisoner release in any way was necessary at this point in time, and I don't see what, again, the quid pro quo was for that prisoner release. And I want to know if you see it.
Well, I can't explain it to you. I mean, it's one of the sort of opaque features of this process. But I'm the wrong person to ask. There was a calculation made here on the part of a prime minister who is fundamentally suspicious, not just of the Palestinian position, but of the American role as well. I mean, he's the guy to ask.
Well, he won't talk to me. Only you'll talk to me.
No, I'm saying, but whatever expressions of outrage and indignation
yes,
you or anyone else in
yes,
the Jewish community has about this prisoner release. First of all, I guarantee you this was not done under American pressure.
You don't think so?
Benjamin Netanyahu has a rhyme and a reason for making this decision. Now, it is not a rhyme or reason, it seems to me, that can be explained readily or doesn't want to be explained. But I guarantee you he checked with the head of Shin Bet and Israeli intelligence, who made it clear that the release of these people, as morally and ethically compromised as it is, wasn't going to be a threat to the security of the state of Israel, number one. And because otherwise I can't explain it. Right. I can't explain it as a gesture to resume a negotiation unless, and again, I keep coming back to what I identified before. Unless Netanyahu has a sense from Kerry that the Palestinian side is prepared to go beyond what they've said before. And this piece of it, like what Kerry heard from each of these two guys, is very opaque. You don't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
Okay. All right.
But it is clearly affecting the behavior of a very tough-minded Israeli president.
Very interesting. Help me clarify two issues. Am I correct, Aaron, that Mahmoud Abbas has said the Palestinians will only accept a comprehensive peace plan that resolves all the issues and that the PA is not interested in a series of interim agreements?
Yeah, not a series of interim agreements, but that doesn't mean. You see, we worked on the assumption that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Right.
It may well be the Israelis and Palestinians have turned that logic on its head and said, we'll agree on what we can. And that doesn't mean borders and security only. It might mean borders and security first. I can see the Palestinians accepting, although Jerusalem is a territorial issue as well as an identity issue, I can see the Palestinians accepting an approach in which you can actually resolve the borders of the state of Palestine. And then, without signing any sort of comprehensive agreement, continuing to negotiate on the identity issues. There are different ways you can do that, but what has to exist is a fundamental belief on the part of Netanyahu and Abbas that they are committed, each is committed to seeing the success of the other, each is committed to meeting the needs of the other, each is committed to giving the other the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, and what you're saying, Aaron, is you don't know this to be true, but this entire process wouldn't make sense to you unless it were true.
This process doesn't make sense to me. Prisoner releases, Kerry's own self-confidence, the absence of leaks. These three pieces do not make sense to me unless there is something else here that has not yet been divulged publicly.
Okay,
I'm not saying it's all worked out. I'm not saying that Netanyahu and Abbas trust one another. I don't want to, as Jim Baker used to say, I didn't ride in on a bale of hay yesterday. I mean, no, I don't want to assume any of that. But things are happening that I cannot explain. And if, as a logical proposition, you have to ask yourself, why are they happening? Why, when they shouldn't be happening, are they happening? Okay. That's the question.
I understand. You know, it's interesting to me, if there's anybody whom I know who would have some, somebody whispering in his ear and telling him what's really going on, it would be you, and they're not even telling you, Aaron.
Well, they don't. They're not going to. First of all, I mean, once you leave the government, you leave the government. And no, I don't think that's not a fair barometer.
Okay.
I think normally this process is close hold, even when there are leaks. Now it's exceptionally so. I mean, there is the opposite explanation, that there's nothing there. That's the other thing. And you want to protect, you're protecting nothing on the assumption and with the hope that something will be produced in the negotiation. I tend not to believe that, though.
I am putting up on the screen right now for our viewers to see some of the major issues to be negotiated. And you talked about the big five. I've added a couple which are ancillary. I want to simply read them to you, and I want you to say whether you think, again, you've told us you don't know for a fact, but do you think it is conceivable that under the present circumstances, the issues could be worked out? Could borders and Israeli security within the borders be worked out to both the satisfaction of Israel and the Palestinian Authority?
Those are the two easiest issues.
Easiest.
Yes, notionally. They're easier than the other.
Okay.
Notionally, yeah. I think it's conceivable.
Okay, you say yes. What about the issue of demilitarization? Will Abbas accept demilitarization?
Well, if he doesn't, then there'll be no Palestinian state.
I know. I'm asking you based on everything.
Without humiliating the Palestinians, you're going to have to develop a 21st century conception of sovereignty that is essentially different.
But you're saying you say it's possible then?
Yeah, because I think it's, look, this is a conflict about three things. Let's simplify this. Land, identity, it's four actually. It's land, identity, religion, and security, all right? Those are the important things. And demilitarization is something that if the other issues are worked out, sure, it can be worked out.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But it's hard to do this serially. You can't. You have to understand the ebb and flow of a negotiation argues against this kind of approach. You need a package. You need to see where the trade-offs are. It's hard to do this serially, and it's hard, to ask somebody, well, do you think he'll agree to a demilitarized state? Well, yeah, sure, he'll agree to a demilitarized state if the other issues break his way. I mean, this is the problem. You can't play this game. It may provide a nice graphic and a way of organizing matters, but it's not real and it's not authentic.
Okay. By the way, I appreciate the way you sophisticate the question. I still want to ask a couple more. Is it conceivable to you that, again, within the package, the issue of Palestinian right of return to Israel could be resolved?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is it conceivable to you that the issue of Jerusalem and whether a portion of East Jerusalem would become the capital of the Palestinian state, can that be resolved?
Yeah, I mean, again, when you say can it be resolved, it's not the absence of clever fixes. It's never been the absence of creative or clever fixes. It's the absence of political will. There's no metaphysical, spiritual reason why Israelis and Palestinians can't have a conflict-ending solution. Mm-hmm. You just haven't had the leaders who are bold enough, risk-ready enough, committed enough in order to do it. Period. Mm-hmm. Full stop. You give me a Mandela and a de Klerk, bingo. Give me a Sadat and a Begin. Give me a Hussein and a Rabin. We have leaders who are prisoners of their constituents. We have leaders who are politicians. They need to be politicians and statesmen too. It's all about leadership. 6 men between 1920 and 1950 were responsible for most of the death, destruction, devastation, and prospects for peace and prosperity for much of the Western world. 6 people. Leadership is the key here. Without that, we have nothing. And that goes for on the American side, too.
Can peace be made between the Palestinian Authority and Israel without including Gaza?
No.
And if Hamas
And by the
rules,
way, when don't use this word peace because it means nothing. Arabs and Israelis have never had it. They don't have it now. And the prospects that they're going to have it anytime soon, the way you and I understand the word, are probably slim to none. We're talking about political agreements that end conflict.
yes,
Over time, normalized relationships between groups and human beings can then develop. But Egypt and Israel aren't at peace. I mean, good luck trying to find a map of Israel in any Egyptian high school text.
I understand. But again, because we're almost out of time, if you say to me that Gaza must be included, and at the moment Hamas rules Gaza, and there does not seem to be any way in which Hamas and Gaza can be included, how can this agreement, whatever it means, work out, Aaron?
Here's what I'm saying to you. You asked it in terms of the inclusion of Gaza. Here's what has to happen. All right. One of the marks of statehood is the capacity to maintain a monopoly over the forces of violence within your society. If Israel's asked to make all of these concessions, then in return, at a minimum, they get a silencing permanently of all of the guns of the putative state of Palestine. Unless that happens, you can't implement this agreement. What Israeli prime minister, and again, I'm an American, I don't want to sound like a representative of the government of Israel, but what Israeli prime minister is going to agree to cede territory on the West Bank if Hamas continues to maintain a supply of high trajectory weapons with great precision, range, and lethality? I mean, the Israelis saw that movie already in terms of the withdrawal from Gaza and Lebanon with Hezbollah. No, so you need a unified Palestinian national movement, one leader or a group of leaders who's prepared to control all of the guns and silence them, period. Otherwise, why would the Israelis want to participate in this exercise? That's a critically important point.
There are some people who keep saying, Aaron, the window is closing, the window is closing. I've been hearing that for 10 years. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf. At the moment, how much does that argument persuade you that something must be done, that the window is closing, that we'll be left with a one-state solution? To what extent do you personally feel a certain kind of angst that either Israel and the Palestinians do this now or it'll never happen?
Well, never's a long time, all right? And the facts on the ground are disconcerting on both sides. Hamas continues to consolidate its control in Gaza. You know, the more unilateral actions the Israelis take in Jerusalem and elsewhere, the harder it's going to be. But I don't believe in last chances. I mean, I just don't. I mean, I think the facts that are important, Mark, are the facts not on the ground. They're the facts in the head.
Yes.
All right? That's where things can change, and they can change anytime. Netanyahu and Abbas need to figure out whether or not they want to end this conflict and whether or not they're prepared to rely on one another, and you're going to need a third party, the Americans. I'm sad to say, I wish they could do it on their own.
Okay.
But they can't.
Aaron, I love talking.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Mark.
I love talking to you, and no one puts the perspective as you do. I will call you often, chase you all the time. You have a Shana Tova Mituka, sweet, wonderful year. We'll talk often.
And same to you, Mark. Be well.
Thank you, Aaron. The thoughts of Aaron David Miller, a member of the U.S. Advisory Council's Israel Policy Forum, and a scholar with the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. There you have it, a very unique perspective. I hope you've enjoyed hearing him. As always, my thanks to those involved in the program tonight in the news, to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, our producer, Alan Orich. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.